all these moving pieces. We have a lot of moving pieces. What do we do with all the moving pieces? I am still determining. I know that others will have suggestions. I remember doing this in 2020. Now, I don't know if I started in 2019 or if we just did it in 2020. My memory, my experiences of memory right now are different than they were before. And they're different again in these astonishingly complex ways. I know many, many, many other people are having experiences like what I'm describing. But in my experience, most aren't able to talk about it at a more widely distributed level. There is some conversation about it that is possible interpersonally if a person has people to talk about it interpersonally with. But what we have discovered over and over and over again is that these invisible people living beyond the veil, where we are interacting with the world of others who don't see us or know we are there, are missing the collective body of the larger distributed media platforms that others are taking for granted as part of their greater collective bodies. And this is the way that we've had to describe it. And who knows how useful that is. It's as close as we can get to accurate. And it's why we've built public media infrastructure in addition to the private media network infrastructure. How do these voices experience the uplifting as part of the collective body in the way that so many others experience uplifting in the context of the collective body? Someone has to be talking about it. Somebody has to be sharing about it. Others need to be present to reflect about the experiences they're learning about and share their own experiences so that there can be increased dialogue. And the public media infrastructure closes a bunch of really challenging gaps, where if we have those gaps, most or all of the things that people try in order to restore their function don't work. And people wonder why. People in the hardship circumstances feel all kinds of things about this should be working, or I'm bad, or like there's something broken or wrong with me. And of course, those are the messages that they're receiving from all around them in so many ways. And people who are not enduring the same kinds of hardship circumstances, they don't know why people are behaving erratically or chaotically or lashing out or collapsing or disappearing. There's this I don't know how else to say it except that if I am one cell in my left shoulder, I am only this cell. This cell right here is so tiny you can't even see it. It is a human being and it's me. And here, my human body is the rest of the collective body. All these cells. So all cells everywhere. Cells in my hair, cells in my fingers. I just thought of raising my foot so that you could see my toes, but I slipped a disc in my back, so I'm not going to do that. This one little cell in my shoulder that is me, that is my human body, is interconnected with the whole collective of many, 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 many living bodies. And there's something that I keep trying to convey about the physiological substrate of it that is not only the case for one cell here being inherently, like because of the nature of existence, inherently connected to every other cell in the body by some way. There are ripples. The energy of anything happening in the collective body has ripples that we may or may not be aware of, and everything happening in the collective body is influenced by what's happening here in this one cell, this one individual living body. And this one individual living body experiences ripples of energy from everywhere else in the collective body. That isn't only happening in the cellular structures of an individual human body like this one. That's also happening between you and me. We could think about the nature of the collective body that is planetary, or we could think about it a different way. But either way, there is inherent connectivity between living beings. We're all here together. Being in natural environments is one way of manifest presence of the individual organism in the greater collective body. That's one way. And if people lose their privilege of interconnecting with the natural world, if people lose their contact with the natural world, if there are influences that make living beings more and more disconnected from the natural world, and if then there are structures and industries that monetize restored interconnectivity that is artificial, that is contrived, that is constructed, then we have these interesting new layers of that interconnectivity. And I know there must be all kinds of different ways that this happens in an individual human body, because we experience how the systems of the body can have struggles with making contact with other systems of the body. One part of the body is supposed to support the other part of the body in a particular way, but it can't. Why not? Because of toxicity in environments, because of what the body is enduring. There are all of these different ways that can happen. And we in the world now are living in circumstances where it seems we have a particular buildup of the way that one part of the body can be disconnected from other parts of the body in a way that doesn't allow for the resilience of the body, of any of the bodies, of any of the individual bodies that make up the collective body, and certainly also of the collective body breaking apart, and then breaking apart, and then breaking apart, and then breaking apart. And then if influences come in and build an artificial bridge and say, I'm going to charge you money to use this artificial bridge between parts of the body, that can seem like a solution. And in many ways, it is not only a solution, at least in certain ways of thinking about it, it's also a really beautiful opportunity to discover experiences that could not have been discovered otherwise, would not have been possible. I never want to dismiss the blessings of that. And when we have lots and lots and lots of those artificial bridges that have been constructed and then monetized, we have this increasing set of circumstances where the natural senses and inclinations of our living bodies are that we would naturally have some kind of contact or sensory input, a feeling state of connectivity with the world, and be able to sense from the world, because the world affects our bodies and our bodies affect the world. Our bodies are part of the world body. But because the bridges are artificial and monetized and can change without warning, can change without plan or notification, what we are sensing from the collective body is different than what is actually happening. Johanna Otigam and I have recordings that will be published about intuitive economic. We're reviewing the notes from our groups in intuitive actual, building up our materials about intuitive economic and what needs to be communicated about it. And in those videos, when they're released, we're going through the details of what happens when part of the collective body is missing, what happens when part of the community body is missing. And what are the impacts to the individual, and what are the impacts to the collective? What happens when the collective has a misapprehension of the individual? What happens when the individual is erased from the collective, but is still there, but is not perceived or is misperceived in some way? And what does it mean for the collective body if the collective body does not have an accounting of the individual organisms that make up that collective body? If I have hands, I don't know if hands is a helpful allegory here. If I have hands and I think that I have 10 fingers with which to respond to circumstances, there are things that I can do with my fingers. I have a steadier way of holding this jar and drinking water. What happens if 6 of my fingers, six of my fingers, what if 6 of my fingers are suddenly taken out of commission, but the rest of my body has no idea that that has happened? There are 2 major things we think about. One is the body tries to pick up the jar, but 6 of the 3 fingers on one hand, 3 fingers on. Anyway, it's harder to pick up the jar, but the body might not know that it might not be possible to pick up the jar in a steady, stabilized way. Another thing that happens, though, is that I don't know which fingers were out of commission making all of these. I chose fingers to talk about. The other thing that happens is that the body starts to think of itself. Here's how we did it. It was like this. The body starts to conceive of itself, the collective body starts to conceive of itself as missing those digits. It becomes normalized. And so there are these parts of the body that are there that are drawing nourishment, that are present, that could be repaired, that could be tended to. But because it's normalized that those fingers are simply missing, the body, wow, am I going to use the word burden? Yeah, the body has the burden of the dead weight. Is it coming through how much I've been through as a person experiencing disablement circumstances? I know that there are a lot of people who will recognize how complicated and painful those words can be. We want the collective body to know all the parts of the collective body and tend all the parts of the collective body. If we don't, we have reduced economic facility. We have reduced capacity. We don't even realize what our lives could be like if we were tending to all our parts. Or we expect that certain things are possible that suddenly become clear as not possible. because we don't have a full accounting of what's really happening in the body, because those artificial bridges that have been monetized and change unexpectedly at times, they're not the natural, they're not the ways of connecting that the life energy has built by building the body pleomorphically over not just one person's life, but the whole ancestral lineage, all of the members of a family throughout time. That's really different than building some tech that connects us in certain ways but not others, and can be controlled by an outside influence that that is missing awareness of parts of the body, is missing awareness of physiological functions that should be able to happen in the body, but is not covered by the artificial constructs that bridge one thing and another thing. And so, to come back to the public media conversation, even with all of the really wonderful strides towards people in hardship situations having some kind of visibility in media, some kind of access to media, most of what we have going on is that disabled people are tokenized. People in intersectional hardship are tokenized. We hold them up and we say, look, we care about these people. But then those people, they don't have their own media platforms. They don't have consistent media privilege. They have to rely upon someone picking them. Oh, you come and participate in this. But where do we find vocational recovery resourcing? Where do we find the ability of the most severely affected people to become part of the greater conversation that the collective body is having? And I mean, I think there are some totally legitimate conversations about we're meeting a situation of contrivance with more contrivance. How do I feel about that? I think it's worth considering. And at the same time, if we want all of the powers of the collective body to be available to deepen nourishment and peacefulness and strength building and resilience and capacity and proficiency and collaborative fluency in the collective body, we need to hear from them. We must make sure that they are not isolated from the collective body, because many or all or almost all of those artificial bridges, those contrived constructs that cost money for us to connect with, if they're not demonstrating true relational integrity with the most severely affected components, constituents of the greater collective body, we don't know what's happening to them. We don't know what solutions they have had to find in their circumstances. We don't benefit from sharing and learning with one another. We cannot flow resources where resources need to go. We cannot make simple decisions together that would relieve suffering, that would prevent violence and extremity from occurring. And so we feel profoundly in our network groups that restoring true communications privilege between the most severely affected individuals and the greater collective body is paramount. And in this day and age, communications privilege has multiple components, two of which are, can we be connected with the world around us in any way, with the environment in any way? And do we have access to tool sets that allow us to use the most popular forms of broadcast communication? Because in the natural world, broadcast communication is something kind of different. And I think any of us who want to talk about that, it's always going to be speculative. But I think a lot of us can really imagine it. Imagining being deep in a natural forest and having really strong relationship with the environment, with the living beings of the ecosystem all around us. There is a certain quality of broadcast communication in any organism in a natural environment, naturally expressing itself, that has effects that are, they'll only travel so far. But in some ways, they'll travel really far. And in other ways, maybe not so much. We have these really complicated, monetized structures for communications now that have absolutely given many of us capacities for communication that we would not have had naturally. And a lot of that also is co-opting communications modalities that we would have had naturally without having to pay for it, or without having to fight for basic decency in how beings treat one another. But one way or the other, we notice there are such significant benefits to conferring media privilege upon one another. If you look at the tech and internet and media industries, you see, I don't know how we want to say it. You see media privilege being increasingly democratized, I guess we could say. More and more people have the ability to do like what I'm doing now. I couldn't do this way in 2020. I haven't looked at those videos again, but it was a different experience trying to do this in 2020. More and more people are able to use these tool sets. And then what do we choose to use them for? What do we build them to do? In the intuitive network, we prefer to restore recovery privilege with anything that we're doing. So we don't want to just rely on the tech. We don't want to just create disability aids that will always be there. We want to restore function. We want to increase function. We want to be hopefully steadily, more or less steadily moving towards not needing the disability aid. If we have a disability aid, we want the disability aid to inherently be helping us recover from the disablement that we've experienced. And it turns out that that is far more possible in far more situations than have been indicated to us. Usually, when it is indicated to us that it is not possible to restore that function, that's been monetized, which makes it, well, it causes me feelings. I have feelings. And so we have spent, a lot of time and energy and exertion, and a lot of years now, finding different and new and better ways to talk about what is the value of hearing from people in hardship. What is the value of them being part of the community? What is the value in them being able to access anything? It doesn't mean that we can make perfect access or perfect inclusion. We are all imperfect. We have the functions we have, whether we are disabled or not, whether we recognize ourselves as disabled or not. We can all do only what we can do, but what we can do causes amazing things to occur. And when we have experienced the kinds of recovery trajectories that are possible because an individual organism who was totally cut off from the greater collective body can now express herself with increasing clarity and build her vocational platform in the world in a way that flows income into situations where there is economic strife, where people are cut off from economic participation, from financial access. It restores the fingers. And then we have all of our fingers. And we can pick up jars and drink water.